welcome to this next edition of the Value Exchange podcast. I am Annabelle Lambert and I'm here with my regular co-host, Rob Pye. Say hello, Rob Pye.
Hello.
And we are delighted, as always, to be joined by some wonderful person. Today, that is Carolyn Dare. We've known Carolyn for a number of years. She's currently based in Somerset and has had a quite long and varied career, mainly focused until a bit more recently on people and change. Quite important people when it comes to change, and often ignored, I think, is Carolyn's experience. But I'm sure she will tell us more about that. More recently, more involved in the environment, climate, hubs and biochar, and we look forward to hearing more about what you're up to in that as well as we move forward. But Carolyn, tell us who you are, where you are, what you do, something about you, and then we can move on from there.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I'm Carolyn. I moved back to the UK about 9 years ago. Lived in Belgium for 35 years, was a transformational coach working with senior leaders across Europe, plus high potentials, so the two ends. Always kind of exploring new ways of doing things. So we were working with communities of practice, innovation communities online 20 plus years ago, before things like Facebook existed. It was always focused on people. How can we make organizations work better together with the people who, are actually their best asset? And a lot of people often forget that, or a lot of organizations often forget that. So about 9 years ago, after a really rocky time personally in my personal life, I have three children. I have 4 grandsons, but I went through quite a difficult divorce. And after 10 years of kind of trying to make things be okay, kind of coincided with my dad getting quite sick as well. So I kind of thought, okay, this is the time that maybe I need to go back to the UK to be there for my dad, for my mum. So I came back. He had quite a nasty cancer and then heart attack. So it was getting quite serious. So I thought, if I don't go now, I'm never going to go. My children are grown up. I turned 50, had a massive party, invited everybody I knew, had a great big party and said, right, guys, I'm off. And nobody believed me. They said, no, yeah, whatever. You'll be back soon. You've been here for so long. But I thought, well, I will go back and see what happens and see if I can fit in, because, of course, I've changed a huge amount. But moving back to Devon, where things probably hadn't changed quite so much, was quite a big thing. So I moved back and met my current partner, which also changed my life. And sadly, my dad passed away. So but I had a wonderful couple of years doing things with him, even just taking him to hospital appointments, that I would not have had. I would not have been able to do that in Belgium. I was traveling the whole time, in different countries all the time. And I also kind of wanted to reduce that because of climate and other issues. The writing was on the wall. We need to do this differently. So my dad passed away and I ended up staying and fitted in, kind of. I didn't fit in quite so much with the business community because things were very much maybe 10 years behind here in a lot of respects of the kind of organizational work that I've been doing. So I kind of gave up a bit on that. Then, of course, Brexit happened, which I did not anticipate at all, else I would have got my Belgian ID papers before leaving, because they actually offered it to me. And I said, well, they said, you've been here so long, why don't you become Belgian? And I was like, well, it's all the same.
No.
Had I known. Now it's a mess. My children and grandchildren are all in Belgium, so it is a regular mess.
My kids were born in Sweden, so they're not Swede. They don't have Swedish nationality, but there's potential. Should they wish to at some point. But there was no intent. As like you, I never expected Brexit to happen.
No.
There you go.
No, my children have told me when I'm very old and decrepit, then they'll do a family reconciliation and I'll have to go over there for my old age when they have to care for me. Drag me back. So that's coming. That's on the horizon at some stage. But yeah, so then I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Because basically lost all of my paid work. We had been doing quite a lot of research into learning transfer. We created a number of tools because for us, going in and training people wasn't having a kind of good effect on the actual organization. It was having an effect on the individual, but not on the organizational change. And processes were often misaligned and not really working together. So there was this massive gap between strategy and business and what people were actually doing. And we kind of got tired of talking to companies who really didn't want to do the kind of work that they needed to do. So focused on the individual, did a lot of work on the individual level. What are the parameters that support learning transfer? So we have a whole suite of tools and a load of videos and all sorts of research around that, which is quite interesting. Oh, Rob, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, if I turn my mute button off, that might help. I hope I'm not interrupting the flow too much, but we're interested in helping individuals and organisations with what we've learned about the behaviour change bit, this thing called value exchange, and it resonated with what you're sort of saying about impact, positive impact of people, but organisations, kind of slow on the uptake where it's not, let's say mechanistic, the change program. You're not kind of just hug a puppy in the corridor, kind of, a bolt-on bit. We're interested in maybe not at the HRD, the human resource director kind of top-down board. We're interested in that, but maybe looking at teams, because we're this stuff really happens individuals and teams when you get a team of people who kind of decide they can't get their work done without doing X or Y, and often X or Y is not going to be enabled as a corporate initiative. It's just like, I've got to solve some problems, and these problems involve the people in my team and other teams who I might connect with. So, the team focus is one I'm keen to explore a bit more of in the NHS, in other corporates who are for profit. I just wonder whether that teams level is something that is has a little more inspiration for radical change in your mind than the corporates.
Yeah, we did an awful lot of work with teams, over the last 30 years. Well, the last 10 years, not so much, but before.
Mm.
And we'd really put the emphasis on understanding yourself, understanding others, and the dynamics within the team, and really spending a lot of time building relationships and trust. And
Mm.
as long as, several friends have created some really nice kind of tools to use around, like, taking the team as different planets. So you had the people planet, the process planet, you had the leadership planet, and the people planet. So there were different planets, and each person within the team, if there was a particularly big conflict or difficult, they would look at each side of that. So, what's happening with the knowledge? Are we sharing enough? What's happening with the people? How are they communicating? How are they working together? What about the processes? And how about the leader? Are they actually doing what they should be doing? And the leadership might not come from one person. It moves around depending on what's happening, and getting away from this idea that, things have become so complex that a leader often feels quite isolated in a way, because they feel that they need to know everything, but there's no way they can. So this is how the kind of leadership then moves from one to the other, because you have different, and it might be a very young person, we found in some cases, that would actually come up with an incredible idea that everybody would say, oh yes, we've never thought about that in this way. And it's just letting people be heard.
And so you kind of got, almost de Bono's hats. We all wear, different.
Yeah,
I'm going to have the
we
people.
did
I'm going to
work
have
with
the,
him. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I love this idea of yours about just taking time to build trust.
Mm.
We love it. It's always been one of three central planks, but the idea of taking time to do that, because again, you're kind of up against this. instant gratification of, give me something, Carolyn, that will take 3 minutes and will change the world, and you'll remember it forever, and you'll just all be fine. Okay, great. In 3 minutes, please. But it's almost the antithesis of that, isn't it? How might we take a few years to build a bit more trust? Love it. Yeah, great.
And people are very uncomfortable with it often. We would take senior leaders and we'd slow things down, learn about yourself. What is important? What are your values? You've never got time. Oh, I've not got time. I've not got time. I've not got time. Okay, let's have a look at what you're actually doing. What is it that's important to you? The excuse of I haven't got time, it's because you're doing things that aren't important. You're making yourself feel important, maybe, but it is not the essence of what you need to be concerned about. So just letting people have the permission to not do certain things, and not having to reply to every single email that comes in immediately. Half of them are just for information. If you're CC'd, don't even answer it. It's just for information. Look at it when you have time. If it's really important, somebody will pick up the phone and phone you. So this kind of getting through all of the noise was something we used to do quite a lot of work on. And people would be very uncomfortable because they just want to do. But you are never going to get a good decision unless you've spent some time reflecting, getting all the information, gathering information, but then some reflection time. So getting them to learn how to reflect was quite a big thing. And most of the kind of training, the team training and team dynamics stuff we used to do was very much experiential. We ran a very good program for about 10 years where we had 4 executives from the top 15 at every single meeting. We trained them to be business coaches, so they would give business feedback, and we'd pair them with one of our psychologists. So you'd have the behavioral coach and the business coach giving feedback after every single thing they did. And we set up lots of different, it was kind of a simulation of 2 years in the life within a week. And that was totally life-changing for many individuals. But again, on the company, a new CEO came in, toxic environment took over. You wouldn't have known that we'd had such a fantastic program for so many years. All of the senior guys we trained, they left. They went to other great companies. They've all done amazing things. The individuals are amazing because it came at the right time in their lives. The CEO who supported us, unfortunately, died. He had a heart attack in front of 120 people we trained. So it was quite, it was quite challenging. But yeah, so that's why we got thinking, hang on, this is the best program we've ever done. It's had the most life-changing effect on people. And yet, for the organization, where is the change? A new CEO can come in, the culture can completely change. So, yeah. So that's one of the reasons why I completely switched. So coming back to the UK had, then to have Brexit and, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So I started getting involved in local communities, which in Brussels, I did that a little bit because we set up various business networks, because I was working with, you mentioned De Bono, I was working with people like De Bono before, the Charles Handys, the Rosabeth Moscanters, all of these guys we were working with regularly and having them over for events. And so I had access to these people. So I said, well, if I buy you a nice dinner, will you come and speak to this group of business people in Brussels? And they'd always agree, you just take them out for a nice dinner and they'd come. And so people who couldn't afford to have, these expensive kind of thought-provoking people could suddenly get access for an hour or so where I'd take them along and we'd have a chat and a lot of them agreed to do it. So that was quite nice. So I'd done that kind of thing, but never in another area. And then coming back, Brexit taking out the work, kind of finishing the research that we were doing at the time. My colleague went on to continue looking at the individual level. So he's just finished his PhD now. So we will probably mix some of that into our app that we created, which will probably be on the back of my website now, I guess. I've moved it. But yeah, so started to look at what can I do locally? And then, of course, we had COVID, which for me, I've always worked virtually, so that's fine. That wasn't a problem. But it was a moment to kind of reflect and think, well, all the communities around here are really coming together. I started working a bit with Trust the People, who train people to become skilled at community engagement. I'd started supporting the Climate Emergency centres across the UK, and decided to set up 2 climate emergency centres. So one in Taunton, Climate Action Taunton, and a land hub, which is the Blackdown Hills Eco Hub. And my friend who owns the land at the Blackdown Hills Eco Hub has a nursery. Maybe, Rob, if you put up the slides, I can just show a few pictures of a small wholesale nursery. And he was actually having a few problems at the time with poor quality compost. Since peat has been removed and since some of the compost is made from green waste nowadays, it sometimes has plastic in it. It sometimes has a lot of woody bits. It's not always that great. So he was having a few problems with his composting, and while plants looked really healthy on the top, really great growth and green, when he went to sell it or to take the plant out, the rooting system was really bad, really, really weak roots. So he had been looking around and had discovered something called biochar. So I thought, okay, let's have a look into this biochar. Not sure. Can you see the slides? Do you want to put the slide up? There we go. Yeah.
There we go.
So this is the nursery, very small nursery. It's the nursery business is a real struggle in the UK at the moment. 60% of the nurseries have closed down in the last 10 years because there's not a lot of money in it. And the 40% that are left, the average age is over 60. So this is a really, really challenging business. Profit margins are zero, I would say. Very, very low, unless you've got a big nursery where you've got a lot of technology and robots and all the rest of it. So I was also looking to support his business as well. So I actually do all his accounting now. So I've put him online. I've done all his accounting online and inventory online, and just really updated a lot of the systems that he had there as well. And then we started looking at biochar. We also, at the same time, he had sold quite a lot of plants to Plymouth University because they had a 3-4 year study funded by ERDF to look at green walls, thermal green walls. And the thermal green walls, they wanted to measure the thermal capacity of a green wall, because if our cities are getting hotter and hotter, can we create a green wall which will firstly cool our houses in summer, but also insulate them in winter? And when you have something like 60% of housing stock built before 1964 and quite leaky, not everyone can put a cavity wall in, And so they did the research, and they've actually found that the thermal capacity is about 30%, which is the same as a green wall, as a cavity wall. So you can put the wall on the outside, so you don't take space. You provide a new ecosystem in the wall in Plymouth on the top line that actually had birds nesting in it and all sorts. And the one at the bottom is the new wall that they've just installed. So they're installing new walls. And that's led to us also working with the local builder, who's also installing green walls in all kinds of places. And we've just actually delivered for the 4th lot of plants to the largest green wall that's being built in London near King's Cross. Not a thermal one, but still, it's going to help with the ecosystem within a city. And it helps with the concrete deflection, so it cools temperatures around it as well. So that led to a kind of partnership with Plymouth University. So when we started looking at biochar, we involved them and invited them along. And this is a poster that I've got, quite a big poster that I carry around with me everywhere because I'm doing lots of presentations about soil. And the layer that we're looking at with the biochar is the microbial level. So all our food is grown in like the first 20, 30 centimeters of soil. And this soil is depleted all over the world. So it's not just looking at pots in a nursery or trays in a nursery with poor soil, it's actually being depleted across the globe. Different reasons, it can be climate, it can be overgrazing, it can be over tilling, digging. Those microbial networks have just been broken down, overuse of chemicals, and it has just degraded it so much. There's runoff, taking all the nutrients as well from those top layers. So we thought, well, is there something that we can do, because it's a nursery, with Plymouth University, because biochar actually provides a safe habitat for the microbes that are, or the microbial networks that have kind of disappeared. So if we can do something, let's have a go and see what we can do. So that was it, really. It was about how can we bring people together around this, talk to lots of people, get people using it in their gardens, see what results we have, and get Plymouth University on board to do the research piece. And they were delighted, actually. So the first thing we did was put biochar into their green walls. And a couple of PhD students did thesis, one looking at the thermal capacity, another looking at water retention, and found that actually it also retains a huge amount of water, it retains nutrients, and it increases the thermal capacity. So good news all round. The plants are more resilient because you don't have to water them so often because the biochar is holding water. The roots are going across the modules at the back, which we thought they would stay in the individual modules, but they're actually joining across the back. So they're creating their own systems in behind the hanging kind of woven material that they're planted in. So we also realised that a lot of farmers, at least around this area, they get subsidies, they get money from DEFRA for cutting hedges or maintaining hedges. So there was an awful lot of material around. There was an awful lot of hedge cuttings, waste, brash, not big enough to sell as logs, but quite, good material. And around the nursery, there was a lot of materials. And we also have a problem with ash dieback. So there was a lot of ash that needed to be taken out of different managed woodlands. So we've basically been using that material because in the past the farmers would just put it in the middle of the field and set fire to it, basically, because they had to move it very quickly out of the way, else they didn't get their payments. I've since written to DEFRA, I've had no reply, but I've said, because they actually forced a local farmer to burn it when we were actually going to pick it up, but it'd been so wet that we couldn't get, a tractor in there at the time to remove the material. But they actually forced him to burn it, else they wouldn't pay him, which I found absolutely incredible because it was all piled up into a nice little pile, huge pile, but it was piled up. It wasn't just everywhere. So that was a real shame. So we lost a bit of material. But biochar, we started with a very, very old retort, which was lying in a field, rusting, as you can see in the top picture, top left. This was the first prototype that Exeter Charcoal had ever built about 15 years ago. And we'd seen it in a field and said, do you think we can have it? And they said, if you can arrange with the local person who's been using it, yes. If you can get it out of the field, yes. So we managed. And then we've been running biochar workshops ever since. So we've had students from the Eden Project. We've had different research students from across the UK, actually. And we've got local farmers, we've got eco groups, we've got all sorts of people and who probably wouldn't come together in any setting. So it is quite nice. There's a lot of food. I do a lot of food. I think people always build those relationships over food. And we talk about climate and we talk about eating more green and we talk about local resilience and what can we do for ourselves. And so that's the kind of thing that we've been really supporting. in a polytunnel, in a field, no running water. We do have a compost loo now. So we've been gradually building up in the past 2 years.
So
With
Carolyn, talk us through the top left, the incinerator that delivers charcoal. Is it?
charcoal.
How do you ensure that what it's putting into the atmosphere? So you're still burning.
You're
Um,
burning, you're baking, you're baking. It's pyrolysis.
you bake. Okay,
You're
okay.
baking. So the charcoal, this one was called, this is called an Exeter retort. So this would take bigger. Oh, it's gone again. It's gone. Would take bigger bits of wood, but it's actually quite difficult to handle if you're not that strong like me. So I quickly managed to get funding for what we're now using, which is, it's called a Dartmoor
That's
Dragon. So it's these
okay. Yeah.
two
So
in the
that's
middle.
top right, the top right one. Yeah,
Yeah, and the two in the middle,
and
the
the two in
middle
the middle.
photo. So that's the Dartmoor Dragon, and this is what Exeter Charcoal have now built. And we managed to get some funding to buy those two. And what we have is a barrel. So you see the barrel on the top left.
Mm.
We fill the barrel with brash, hedge cuttings, whatever. There isn't a lot of oxygen, so you pack it really, really tight. And
Okay.
along the bottom of the barrel are a series of holes. So when you put the barrel into the box, so you lift the box up, you put the barrel in, all the methane comes out through those holes in the bottom, and there's a little fire underneath. So the fire actually burns the methane off
Burns it.
as
That's
it's
the
going
baking.
around and around and around, and it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter. So you get very little coming off. You get some steam first if the wood is slightly damp. You get some CO2, but there's not a lot because most of it is burnt off within the dragon, if you like. And it does feel like a dragon when you lift it up because the flames kind of come at you. Um, so that's how we keep at least the methane down. The methane is all burnt off. And you get up to temperatures. Ideally, we should be cooking it at around 550, between 450 and 550 degrees, but it will very quickly go up to 1,000 degrees if you're not watching. So you are removing all of the tars and everything else from the wood, basically. So you're left with pure carbon,
So I
which
think
is
what's incredible about the story is that this very much people meets place meets planet, and are actually doing things that are really quite it reminds me of Totnes, a transition town, and the
mm,
Schumacher College. It's a physical place where people come together and they eat and they do sustainability and they, experiment and they learn, and then experiment and learn. And it's kind of that melding of, your previous life of people. I'm joining the dots here. Maybe I shouldn't
mm.
be. The people change, but people meets planet meets experimentation meets, really some quite ambitious experimentation. Um,
Yeah, and it's all
so
based on
that's
behavioral change because getting people ready, because things are not going to be easy. They really aren't. And it's about just getting them ready to, if people are going to start fighting over toilet paper, I think that's one of the things that really push me is like, if people are going to start fighting
Interesting.
over toilet paper, what's it going to be like when they're fighting over food or some other, there's no electricity
yeah,
or power cuts?
yeah,
What is going to happen then? So that was one
yes,
of the things that really spurred me on to building this much wider relationship with people who wouldn't naturally get together. There was a lot of social isolation after COVID as well. Groups weren't coming together. There seems to be a real kind of silos of groups in the UK, which I was surprised at. Maybe it's elsewhere. There aren't so many community groups necessarily in other countries, but I don't know, they seem more connected somehow. But here it felt very, very silo driven and lots of people almost doing similar things but not coming together. And I was thinking,
mm,
actually, we all need to come together and do something around. So within the people that come to the workshops, they're often in other groups. They are often, part of other groups. So it's kind of that project of projects, if you like, bringing lots of different groups together to start talking. to start sharing, to see how we could potentially work together, support each other, and just have that basic relationship, so when things go wrong, you know the person, you can call them, and and see what can be done. So this has led
Fantastic.
to lots and lots of. I've been going around everywhere for about 2 years. I'm called the Biochar lady now, doing markets, selling our little boxes, our starter packs to get people trying it out in their gardens, doing presentations to all sorts of people from the Rotary. And it's a kind of a mix of a bit about biochar, a bit about climate, a bit about sea level rise, what's going to happen in this area, because we're in quite a low, well, I'm in a high area, but next to me is a very low area.
Mm.
So it's a bit of a mix. Talking with businesses, talking to the local Lib Dems. I spoke at their AGM, because in East Devon, they're actually using the waste material. They have a retort, like the Exeter retort, the big one, and they actually use that for their waste and are putting biochar back into their parks and woodlands and things. So they're already doing things like that. Aston
And
University.
another, sorry, a slight
Yeah.
delay, but
Mm.
the interruption. So we've been having conversations with some businesses and government buyers. So not just DEFRA, but DWP or local government, or so buyers and suppliers who um, are invariably struggling with community kind of issues. In other words, place-based interventions where they're saying, well, I really want to do some cool stuff with communities, and it's not, what do we do beyond going to schools and helping kids write their CVs to get into the industrial complex as it is now, as opposed to, a transition for green jobs that may be beyond wind farms and battery generation, that are sort of part of the established psyche of sustainability, rather than the sort of innovation you're talking about here. And it kind of comes back to the corporate change issue in Belgium that you articulated really well earlier on, in that companies kind of want the sugar pill solution to, I want to engage with community. Whereas, what does that mean? I've got 60,000 staff in the UK, and I kind of want to be able to do one engagement that affects communities everywhere positively with really incredible stuff. And and of course it's kind of back to that. How about taking some years or moments to reflect on how you might build trust and engage and get down to a local level of experiment. I mean, it's there. It's everybody's doing it. It's not just in Devon. You kind of look hard enough anywhere, and you will find lots of fantastic, isolated, as you say, projects. And there seems to me to be such an opportunity for businesses to play a part in that, but you don't get to that project from the current culture of business thinking. You've almost got to get from the project you're talking into the business pilots that can then spread and join the dots. It's sort of like community development into organizations, right? Is that, do you have any thoughts on how you might join the dots, globally, nationally, to particularly getting bigger organizations involved more in these projects at the sort of scale they want to be, but it has to be one project at a time.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I did a presentation to a group of organizations based locally, smaller companies, and they've been talking about bringing volunteer days into their organization. I think they do that quite a lot in the UK. Um, and they actually came. They did come. Several. I had like 5 people come. Um, but it's great for social prescribing. If people need a bit of time to reflect, getting out in a field, whatever the weather, you just need the right clothes. Getting involved in something like this, just the physical activity, and the communication and the talking and the stories and the, over a bowl of soup or, whatever I'm bringing down, some beers at the end of the day, that just changes the communication between teams. And that's the kind of thing I was doing in Belgium. We'd have them doing different things. It wouldn't be the mad SAS type things. It would be where you were using your
Yeah.
brain. We never did any of the mad SAS type things. So it's kind of similar, but we'd have them. We'd have senior executives who were used to, 5-star hotels everywhere, going and working in soup kitchens. We'd have them cooking the dinner for us, in different chateaus or wherever we were. We're always in very nice locations. But we'd have them doing it, or we'd have them doing things that just put them outside of their comfort zone. And something like this can do that. They'll say, "Oh, I don't know how to do that. Oh, it might be dangerous. Oh, this. Oh, I've never used a there are so many little things that you can learn, but it's about being together.
Yeah, so
It's
a lot,
about
lot of companies that we talk to work with, volunteering is a rich thread,
mm,
but there's often a gap between two gaps. One between the the supply of volunteering days, and the demand for what could be used, and in other words, um, uh, we could do with more volunteering days from organisations. So yes, it's happening. But so I think that's one gap. I think there's the bigger, as equal, bigger gap in the type of things that people are doing at the moment in volunteering days. And I think you hit the nail on the head. So I'll go into school and do a presentation on um, what it's like working for my company, and that will be a volunteer. Or I'll go and paint a shed, or work on an allotment. I think the kind of social prescribing, which you might need to define, but it's essentially a non-clinical GP kind of intervention that would say, why don't you take some time reflectively, and here's an organisation, Carolyn's involved with, and you can go and spend some time on do some biochar for a day and find out what that even means. It's fascinating,
yeah.
and that it's a step beyond going into a school for a minute and talking about the existing world. If you're taking space for yourself, aren't you, to kind of meet and connect and reflect and take a step back for a moment.
Yeah, or meet with people in other organizations. I have
Mm.
been toying, I haven't done it yet, but I am really toying with the idea of starting coaching again, because I used to do a lot of transformational coaching and team coaching as well. And there is something different that happens when you're outdoors doing that. When you're not sat in an office or a room, it is completely different. And people, if they have those moments of awe, if you see a dragonfly flying over or a butterfly or just touching soil, there is a chemical reaction in your brain with serotonin. There is a chemical in soil that will affect your mood. So coaching can be done in a very different way outdoors, and I've done it in the past. I haven't done it yet here because we needed the compost loo and different things in place, which we now
Mm.
have. But I am thinking of whether I move it up to that stage to try and get a little bit of funding as well for all that we're doing. If companies, and it might actually be more interesting to have people from different companies, because there's so much learning that can go on between the different companies, or it can be the same team. If an intact team, a lot of teams don't actually physically sit together anymore. But if we had a team coming from different countries, a lot of the work I did previously was teams flying in from all over the place. That's more difficult now. But if there's an intact team who have got some communication problems, those kind of things are really easy to kind of play with in the outdoor environment with the kind of coaching level as well. So mixing it between actually doing something and them reflecting, also having the space to breathe some fresh air and, be outdoors, physical exercise as well. So I think a mix of all of it might be, I've kind of been toying with the idea of going to that now as a next kind of idea.
And we're making the business case to organisations, to government, that we talk always about community, that social value,
Mm,
social impact, it has to happen in communities. It's not something
mm,
that and what that means is it provides impact to people in a place, in a context. So if you want to talk about social value, social impact, it's kind of like what place, and so rather than, oh, we just offer a job to somebody that's unemployed, if you take that into a particular place and kind of will work out what is that, what is the, where's the money, what's the employment, what's the job, where's the place, that actually unpicking these things, as complex as they are just really grounded, if you forgive the pun. They're grounded in a
Mm,
place, aren't they? They are
yeah,
there. They have presence in somewhere. um,
yeah.
yeah, it's
And I
great.
guess for us, we've been really lucky because we've got the academic partner. We've got
Plymouth.
Plymouth University. Yeah, we've got and Reading University. I've had student research from there too. We have small businesses. We have the farmers, and we have the community, the local community. I've also set up a food growing space as well. Maybe I'll just show you a couple of fantastic photos that we've got of biochar because I was so excited about these photos. So this is we as part of the current research project. Um, we've got use of electron microscopes. So they've contributed, the Plymouth Electron Microscope Centre have contributed £5,000 worth of electron microscope use to our project at the moment. And it just shows this is a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of biochar. And if you were to take 1 gram and lay it out flat, it would cover a tennis court. And you can just see from the porous kind of, you can see why the microbes are just kind of hiding out in it, and why it becomes a habitat and how it can retain the water and nutrients. It just absorbs everything. And then here, this is things like a worm egg. And in the bottom left, there's you can see the hyphae network. It's like all little strands. That's a fungal network setting up. And this was in plant pots that we'd only planted a few months before. So it's amazing to see it kind of forming quite so quickly. So it's nice to have that scientific side plus the farmers, plus, the whole community. It's the whole kind of gamut of people together in this area in a way that we're bringing together. So that's, and we're running lots of trials. So we're linking it back to food because, a lot of food that we eat is actually depleted in vitamins, minerals, probiotics. So using biochar in the food with having the increased microbial networks, we think may lead to better quality food, or food with more minerals or more nutrients in it. So that's one of the next pieces of research I want to do, which I'm applying for funding for at the moment. And I'll just skip through these. So some of the trials that we've done, just using 10% of biochar, you can see the huge radish. It was about the size of bigger than a golf ball. And I thought it was going to be really woody inside, but it wasn't. It tasted exactly the same as the normal size radish. So when you're looking at food resilience, biochar could also have a role to play there. And the lettuce as well, the lettuce on the right, that's 10% biochar. The one next to it is 30%. And the one beside that is just compost. So it's much bigger. And if we could have food like that growing in the lower walls, green walls within cities, then you're also feeding people locally, potentially with healthy food that's grown in the walls. We're now mixing it with slurry. This is the
Oh,
exciting
nice.
next piece.
The smelly
Lovely.
bit.
I'm not doing that. That's me doing that. But we've put it in, mixed it with slurry and put it into a field because we think we might actually get better quality grass, more nutrition in the grass, or more sugars potentially in silage. And it also absorbs smell. So you can put it in the bedding, cow's bedding. And Rob from Exeter Charcoal has recently made biochar out of horse manure and straw. So you can also make it out of waste materials as well, for a very fine biochar. They use it in chicken houses because it absorbs all the gases. So you're actually making these environments much more healthy. And there is a project I saw recently, and I spoke to the company who are probably going to be doing that, to actually create 9 new biochar small installations along the Wye Valley, where they've had huge pollution from poultry farmers, and use the poultry waste to make biochar from that and then reapply that back onto the fields. and hopefully it will absorb a lot of the water that's running off and the pollution that's running off of those fields. This is our food. This is on. I'll just show you a few because I'm so proud of our food growing community. So this is the top left is what it looked like in April, at the beginning of April. So completely overgrown field. And then we have had loads of people just turn up and come and help us. We had a big potato planting and onion planting day, top right, in April. And we have just managed, with lots of help of lots of different people locally, have come together. And the last event I had 65 people where we did lots of barbecuing and using our own food that we've managed to grow. And we've also contributed, I don't know how many wheelbarrow fulls of beans, but we've supplied local community larders and food shares and just shared lots of food with people in the whole area, nutritious food that's grown in biochar, actually. We did throw some biochar down as well. And we didn't water our potatoes or onions at all. And we had 2.5 months of really hot weather. And they survived and thrived, actually. The onions were just fantastic. So that's a little bit on our food.
So, Carolyn,
So
are you getting any opportunity? I mean, because this is a wonderful story. It's very local. You've got various pieces which are supporting. You've got the research, you've got the people, you've got the land, you've got and the community is building around what you're doing, and you are, sound like you are motivated on a mission to educate, really, as to how this can be a good thing in many places. How much opportunity are you getting to take this out of the local community and talk about what you're doing elsewhere? How much cross
yeah.
pollination is a word I want to use, which is not inappropriate, maybe, but elsewhere in the country, in the world, what
I think because I am who I am, I naturally have those networks anyway. And so it's happening all the time, to be honest. I mean, I just had a call this morning. I caught up with a friend who left Belgium, a German friend who left Belgium more or less the same time as I did, who was working in Laos and on lots of EU projects. She's ended up in Switzerland. And I caught up with her a couple of months ago because I hadn't spoken to her for a while. And I said, oh, okay, what are you up to? And she is now in regenerative farming. She's working for this big institute of regenerative farming, looking at biochar, believe it or not. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. Or they had kind of filed biochar away. That's what they'd done. They'd filed biochar away. So I've kind of opened that up again in our discussions, because the kind of retorts I'm using, they didn't have there. And so, and the people that I've met, Aston University have been doing a huge amount. So we were actually mentioned in their guide. Ebury is their centre where they're doing a lot of biochar experimentation, or the greenhouses in Birmingham. And Birmingham actually grow all their own flowers for the whole city and all their plants, which is quite interesting. But the university has kind of a trial biochar making. It's in a shipping container, big machine, costs quite a lot of money. They're heating the greenhouses with it. So we're linked in with them, but we managed to get into their guide last year or the year before, so that was lovely. So we've had discussions with them. Reading University, a student came and stayed with me. He's researching biochar globally. So those connections are being made. Nicola Peel, who came and spoke at my last event, she's been using biochar in Sierra Leone and in Ecuador, using it also for oil spills in Ecuador, as well as moving farmers away from slash and burn, using what they call alley cropping, so shading crops, using the biochar to hold the moisture and nutrients, and then planting in the shade, and then knocking down the crops that are kind of creating that alley. So yeah, I'm kind of linked in all over the place now, and have done a few webinars with people like a guy called Dr. Compost, who has an amazing network of
Now
Dr. Compost and
there's
Mrs. Biochar.
Mrs. Biochar and Dr. Compost. Now that is
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
battle I want to see.
yeah. So he's amazing. So he's got this fantastic network of people who are into soil across the world, I think. So we've done joint webinars. We never physically met. I keep saying I must because he doesn't live that far away. But we haven't got around to meeting yet. But he's also talking about what we're doing. So, again, we're getting connected with lots of other people. I've got manufacturers of machinery are coming to visit me because they're looking at food waste. So they supply machines to the food industry and looking at whether biochar will help reduce the acidity of the compost that they're making. They've got a new system that's designed for homes, which I think they're going to launch soon. So, it has a role to play in lots of different areas. I had a guy who's created a fantastic little biochar machine. This one at the top in the middle is a tiny little thing that you can cook food on. You could heat a barn with it. You can barbecue on the top. You can grill underneath. You can put a saucepan on the front. You can do flatbreads on the back, and make biochar all at the same time out of twigs. So he's a guy from the Malverns that came down to our last event as well, and cooked food and just showed people how they could be, using this in their own homes, and putting biochar in their own soils with their own waste. So it's just about reducing waste all the time and using it for other things. So he's at the moment trying to create a bigger version, because I said for my groups I need a bigger version. I need to cook more food. So he's doing a bigger version at the moment. And then we're doing other events like hedgerow medicine, taking people back to actually these weeds. If we do have a problem with food at some stage, there's a lot of things we can eat that we've forgotten that we can eat. So we've had Sophia coming and doing things on hedgerow medicine and other events looking at insects. So we've had groups coming with their cameras and looking at insect photography. And these are some of the photos. We've got a couple of fantastic photographers and a biologist living locally. It's just building awareness of what's around you, what is around us, what's, that people wouldn't normally see these insects, and when you see them magnified, they're just amazing.
This is
And
this.
what we're trying to do.
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead.
I'm using the same excuse for not tidying up my flower beds. Is that I'm trying to create some wildlife zone that is more natural than me planting what I want to see. I'm doing very well because I'm a terrible gardener, but you do see much more diversity, by just letting
Yeah,
it be.
exactly. Yeah. And it's also creating those moments of awe, because when I've done a lot of work with neuroscientists during my various years of working, and psychologists, but neuroscience actually shows, and there's a very good friend of mine who's a liminal coach, so he works with the brain in different ways, Mike Parker, and he has introduced me to looking at awe very differently. So previously when we're kind of delivering, presentations about climate, or, it's all doom and gloom and, oh my God, this is going to happen to you and we need to do something. And all that does is just close down your brain. You just go into fight flight mode. It's fear. It's, I can't do anything. Who am I? And people just close down, and then you expect them to do something. Well, this is actually never going to work. So what I've been introducing is these moments of awe. And if you're out in a field, if you see a beautiful butterfly, if you bring attention to a bee or a flower or whatever, that is a moment of awe. And at that precise moment, your brain opens up. So it kind of connects to what they call the DMN network, which is the network. It connects lots of different parts of your brain. Your frontal cortex kind of gets all of these parts of the brain working together, which are active during daydreaming. So it's how filmmakers, they go into this state. It's almost like a meditative state, but it's more like daydreaming, which opens up possibilities. It's solution driven. It's it's just opening, opening, opening. It's the creative thinking, and you allow that to happen when you have that second of awe. And so sometimes it can just be an image. Sometimes, so I put these lovely insect photos into everything I'm doing now,
That's
because it just
super interesting.
brings that through.
I'm very conscious of the time. We are 55 minutes in. It's gone so fast. It's
Oh
been
dear.
super interesting. Super interesting.
Mm.
Um, I guess a question we normally sort of close with is how can we all help, really? What was the call to action with what you're doing?
Come and make biochar. No, I mean, yeah, no, it'd be great to have, if I do set up some space for workshops and coaching, that would be great to have people come and get involved and give us a donation so that we can
Yes,
afford to buy seed
funding
next year
maybe.
for our garden. Pay me. Yeah, I've been doing all of this work for free for 2 years, so that's not
Wow.
really very sustainable. So I do need to
Well,
find
mm,
kind of funding.
it's a really interesting point because I was watching. Occasionally, I watch Country File on Sundays because I like it, and I was watching this whole piece that they were doing about peat and looking after the peat bogs, and I was sort of making the point, that everybody's focused on, renewables and making wind farms and solar, and actually, the management of something like the peat zones or however you term them is just incredibly important and valuable to the planet, and actually the fact that again these people, there aren't enough people, and it's not voluntary, but it's sort of, it's I think we have to rethink about what's important but generally
Mm.
to us all, and what we value and where we want to apply our work, our interest, the whole thing. And this is what you're doing is very much part of that, I think. So thank you for
Yeah.
that. Rob, do you have
Yeah, and
anything?
I think, yeah, well, I think, I want to thank you for such a stimulating discussion presentation, Carolyn. I think the money thing is a to be continued. I think you can understand with things like food the enormous economic interests that are there
Mm.
in the current supply chain kind of configuration. But it's kind of when you link the social prescribing to the well-being to being an employee to what's the economic, what's the money case, that this starts getting hugely interesting. You're kind of looking at creating biochar apprentices, the apprenticeships that would kind of
Yeah.
be,
Mm.
you're probably already on it, but there's just a
Mm.
million and one other things that where you can see the kind of employment, the money, the um, regenerative, sustainable, circular, all of the buzzwords kind of today going, yeah, but we need to make this more mainstream. We need to make it not about volunteering, not for money for 2 years. We need
Yeah.
to make jobs out of this stuff.
Mhm.
And we
Yeah.
need those jobs to pay well, really well,
I
because
was
of
Yeah,
course
I
we
cross.
guess.
do
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
more energy.
Yeah, I guess what I've been kind of discussing with various different people now is carbon offsetting, because you are putting carbon back into the soil. So if companies, instead of planting hundreds and thousands of trees and buying up great big tracts of land where it's not going to be used for food anymore, which is another problem, there aren't enough nurseries growing trees, so those trees are being imported. If those companies instead could pay the farmer or the local landowner or a group of biochar apprentices, which I'm also trying to kind of set up at the moment, who are potentially sons and daughters of farmers who have not got enough money coming in either. So it kind of gives them another little income stream. If there was some kind of carbon offsetting platform, and I've actually last week found somebody who's just done that or started to do that, so that's kind of good. the companies could offset the carbon that they're using, the farmers could get some money, and the young people who are making the biochar or, are involved in the biochar production could also be paid. Then you get a much more circular kind of deal going on. And if the farmers are also growing food in biochar, it's going to help with things like runoff, with the pollution in rivers. We could put a biochar or a charcoal gabion in a stream and it will collect a lot of the chemicals that are running down our rivers at the moment, at least the farm chemicals. So there's loads of things we can do. But I think it's about it becoming sustainable in its own right. So it not needing funding from elsewhere, that it kind of self-sustains. And I've started,
Yeah, and carbon offsetting hasn't been brilliant, but although
no.
it's kind of like, let's hammer and nail. If the only tool we have is a hammer, the only sort of thing that we end up doing, everything looks like a nail, everything looks like carbon offsetting. But it's not just about planting trees. And I think if we just get that message out to the UK, the world, that there's so much more other than just so looking at nature regeneration and what the economics might be about that. There needs to be hard science, of course, about carbon capture and carbon sinks, and looking at the role of things like peat and biochar in that. But it's the sustainable in its own right bit that you go, well, farmers are going to do this because it's not just a subsidy, it's not just an artificial market of post
Well,
the
yeah. I mean, the thing that sort of was crossing my mind, Rob, when you were saying you were looking at the, where the investment is going at the moment, innovative investment, and I just think about how much money is put into GM, into genetically modifying food. We're looking at your pictures. I'm like, well, why don't we stop doing that and go back to nature and do this instead? And meet all those community, that circular, that that thing that we desperately need to get back to.
because I think this could just go on forever and ever. I've only
Yeah,
just
good.
started the debate, but the
This is
um,
my baptism with
again, in
biochar.
contrasting it with the GM, there's hard science behind what you're talking about, real science, and but it's maybe a natural science in a way that GM or genetically modifying is not maybe a natural organic science. It's an artificially constructed science, and you can imagine back to the patenting the genome um, debacle, that actually you could see that capitalists, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but self-interested parties could see billions and billions in patenting a genome in the way that they couldn't in manufacturing um, furnaces, etc., and doing
Yeah.
natural intervention. So I think it's what is the positive counter narrative that does money, or does sustainability and jobs and livings uh, amongst things that are not necessarily going to be just scientific, like GM. And
Yeah.
there's so much natural science in what you've said. I
Yeah.
think it is keen to find ways to sort of promote more of that.
Yeah. I had a couple of discussions about offsetting with companies that are doing it for biochar, but they're offering such a small amount of money because all they're looking at is the carbon that you're putting in the soil. And I'm like, hang on, you're helping the microbial network. You're helping microbes bring nutrients back up to a plant root. You're helping prevent runoff. You're aerating soils. You're helping compacted clay soils become, more fertile. There are so many different things. You're cleaning water. We've got a biochar at the moment being used to mop up a diesel spillage in a field. You could run it in water, you could use it in waterways. So you're hitting 8, 9, 10 targets. It's not about one. It's not just about carbon in the ground. So they should, look at the price of that. How much does that cost? There's more than half of the world's organisms are in the soil. We don't even consider that. the fungal networks. Fungus is being used to break down oil and eat oil and plastic, and there's so many amazing things happening.
Yeah, I mean, we've had social impact bonds, financial instruments for reducing reoffending. How do we stop, reduce the number of prisons up because people are not committing crime? But where's the social impact bond for the beaver bond, where we want to see more beavers in the wild, or we want to do more wetland regenerative, nature rewilding, so we can actually pay on, as you say, clean water, clean air, stuff like that actually provide positivity in the world. We pay for the quality of our soil because we're just we're doing things to help reduce waste and to help the quality of our soil. Now, those things will really pay dividends, but they're not kind of in the, but I just got somebody a job. I'll give you £22,000 for that because you created a job for somebody who's long-term unemployed. Yep, I can do that. Yep, job done. And yet everything else that. So I think that the innovative financing, we haven't even begun to think about that, have we? Really?
No, and it's replicating it, isn't it? It's just replicating it. You can replicate what I'm doing anywhere, really.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. You could. It's quite easy. I've managed it. Anybody can do it. So, it's about building on what we've already got. For me, it's an open source thing. It really is. I was very supportive of the open source community for 30 years. So for me, it's open source. Anybody can make biochar. You can do it anywhere. Just keep the,
so we need to dare everybody to Carolyn Dare and Mrs. Biochar to kind of, let's make our soil really healthy.
Buying you an apron with that written on. Yeah. Indeed.
Carolyn, it was a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Nice to catch up with you both.